All right. So we're working with the sun today, and the sun is one of those things. Is not one of those things. The sun is like the main important thing in modern astrology, and so when I'm basically approaching this in the same way, if you, I know Natalie was at my Venus lecture, or was at part of the Venus lecture, but basically I've been going through all of the planets and their complete significations from a traditional standpoint. So Nicole, if you were looking for like kind of more of the kind of psychological viewpoint, we're not going to be looking at that too much today, but I wouldn't mind talking about that. So maybe we could get into that as a discussion. But I've got a few different things planned in connection with this. So as we start to look at what the sun tends to represent, or how it was seen and represented, there are some kind of implications in the chart that we can also look at. One of the main things I'm talking about is the sun as a representative of fame and rank. And so I thought that would be something that we would look at, and royalty, right? The sun is royalty, fame, and rank. So that's one of the first things. So this is a beautiful alchemical picture. I think that was so gorgeous. And so we start with the first century and Vedic Valence. And now, think now, first of all, how we see the sun nowadays in modern astrology. And if you want, you can put into the chat some of the ways that we look at it. I know that ego is one of the words that people tend to look at. Self and ego. There's so much written now about about this idea of the sun as a primary indicator for self. And this is, in my opinion, part of the indication, or part of the, shall we say, the byproduct of how astrology has changed from being a geocentric or earth-centered model to being an anthropocentric or person-centered model. And so the person-centered model obviously would see the sun, of course, as the center of everything, the center of our solar system. And so the sun, of course, would be kind of representative of the self. We would be the sun kind of radiating outwards in our life. Okay, so that would be kind of how the anthropomorphic or the anthropocentric way of looking at it. But from this, we still find the sun to be central, right? So the all-seeing sun, first of all, it's the all-seeing sun, nature's fire and intellectual light, the organ of mental perception. Now that's interesting, the organ of mental perception. Now we know from Jyotish, and we know also from this time period, and these earlier time periods, that the moon is rather connected with the mind, and Mercury is the intellect, right? But we also see here that the sun, as representative of light, is the light of intelligence, nature's fire. So nature's fire ignites intelligence, ignites our mind, ignites our perception and our senses. So whereas the moon is where all of those things are housed and how they operate, the sun is the spark. Once again, there's this vitality, this life. The sun is really connected to life. And last week when we were talking about the part of fortune, we were talking about the part of fortune and this concept of the high leg, which is the planet or the place in the chart that represents how much life there is in the chart, right? The high leg represented how much life there was, and was the symbol of vitality, and how all of the 5 high legical places, all of the places that you looked to find the high leg, were places that had to do with either the sun, the moon, their relationship, or their relationship. So for instance, the first place you looked was the sun by day. The second place you looked was the moon by night. The third place you looked was the ascendant, which is the eastern point, and where, of course, the sun becomes visible. The fourth place was the part of fortune, which is the distance between the sun and the moon. So it was the representative of the solar-lunar relationship. And then the last of it, or like the exact solar-lunar relationship at the time that the chart itself was drawn. That's the part of fortune. And then lastly, either the previous conjunction or prevention. So that's the previous new moon or the full moon, which once again represents what's going on with the lights. And so the sun is what radiates outward. The moon is that which reflects his light. Remember, she supposedly has no light of her own, but she reflects his, which is why the relationship between them is so important. So looking at all of the things, so this is where this idea of nature's fire or spark and the intellectual light. So even though we know that the moon is there in Jyotish, they call it manas, which is kind of the mood, the mind and emotions, and kind of all of how the person responds to all stimulus together, which includes the mind, is the moon. But here we see that the sun is what lights everything in order for the mind to work properly. So kingship and rule, here's our royalty thing. Intellect and intelligence. Oh, Layla's here, yay. Hey, Layla, welcome. We're just getting started. So I've already done a little bit of talking about stuff, but it's nothing that you maybe haven't already. And actually, you'll be a really good person to, when we go into the discussion of the differences between how modern astrology sees the sun and we look at the sun now, you'll be a great person for that discussion. Okay, so as we're talking about the sun we were talking about the difference between what we're looking at, right? How it's nature's fire and intellectual light, the organ of mental perception. I was saying, that sounds a lot like both the moon and Mercury, which we both know to be mind and intellect, but somehow the sun is involved in it too. And I was saying that I think that the key to it is this idea of nature's fire and intellectual light. So it's the spark, the sun as the generative light that creates life is the spark that lights everything. It's the light of intelligence. So kingship and rule, intellect and intelligence, beauty. So here we've got Venus now coming in, right? Motion, which of course Mercury and the moon also represent. Loftiness of fortune, the part of fortune tends to represent that. The ordinance of the gods, okay, so whatever the gods kind of give out. Judgment, public reputation, action. Now Mars usually has that. Authority over the masses. So once again, we've got rulership. The father, the master, right? The sun is the ruler, the universal ruler of the father by day. Now, modern astrology still uses that, right? They still use the father, they use the sun to represent the father and the moon to represent the mother. We, in our tradition, we know that the sun by day represents the father, Saturn by night, and the moon by night represents the mother, and Venus by day. A friendship, which I think is interesting, noble personages, honors consisting of pictures, statues, and garlands, high priesthoods, rule over one's country and over other places. Now, one of the things that I think is interesting about almost all of these things, and you've noticed that I brought up the different planets that are associated with these same things, is that all of these things are things that light up our life. You know, let's say you're not feeling so good and you walk by a beautiful rose garden. That can light you, that can brighten you up, that can lighten your step, that can brighten you up, right? And so brightening, when we're thinking about brightening, there's the sun. If you've been sedentary for a while and then you start maybe running or doing some kind of activity, that motion can raise heat in your body, right? The sun is, we're going to talk about this in a second, but the sun, of course, represents fire. It's a hot and dry planet, right? So motion can raise heat. Loftiness of fortune goes with rulership and royalty. Ordinance of the gods, remember, sun is called God, right? And the ordinance of the god is whatever they kind of decide to give to you. And so, excuse me, that would represent God, you being favored. The ordinance of the god is by what's that which you are favored. Judgment or public reputation, once again, the sun represents the public. You know, one of the things that one of the distinctions that I make about the sun is that even though we think that the sun represents, you know, can represent exhibitionism and attention, neediness and attention, neediness for attention, what I tend to really notice the most with people who have prominent planets in Leo or Leo rising or Sun in Leo or whatever, is that, or Moon in Leo, is that they need recognition. If they don't necessarily, I think Kabiri has one of these things in Leo that we're talking about, but it needs recognition. It doesn't necessarily
Damn, you saying I'm full of myself?
no, 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 no. Listen to what I'm saying. Listen to what I'm saying. It needs to be recognized. It doesn't necessarily need to be public. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has a lot of, right? The sun is one of the things about the sun is the sun represents arrogance and confidence. So it might not be arrogant or confident, but if it does something, it wants to be recognized for doing it. That's all I'm saying about Leo. Leo
I was just
and the
kidding.
sun and recognition. That's what I'm talking about. So when we talk about judgment and public reputation and how Leo has this, Leo has, and certainly at its worst or at its most extreme or even at its in its deepest level, sometimes it can have a what shall we say? It can have a connection with exhibitionism and public display, right? So putting itself on display, um, uh, being self-absorbed, taking over, sucking up all the oxygen. It can, right? The sun is the main light in the sky, right? It's the thing that we can always see. We can't always see Venus. We can't. Jupiter is bigger than the sun, but we can't always see him because he's further away, right? Saturn we can't always see. We can't always. The moon we can't always see, right? Because of either she's waxing or she's waning. But we can always, unless there's a cloud in the sky, we can always see the sun. Right, so the sun is always visible. So this is the connection between Leo and visibility. But really, what my point, the point that I'm making is the distinction for me is that the sun and Leo need recognition. So that means that even if they're the most unassuming person, if they've done something, they want to be recognized for it. That's it. That's all I'm saying. All right. Authority over the masses. Once again, that has to do with rulership. The father, the master, we've talked about that. Friendships lighten up our life. Friendships light up our life, right? They bring joy. So there's a connection between the sun and joy, right? And there's a connection between life and joy, which actually is really necessary to bring, because a lot of people are experiencing life with no joy. And so certainly Venus and Jupiter, we think about Venus and Jupiter mostly as what Venus is certainly especially one who brings pleasure, right? And mirth and fun and frivolity, right? But here it's about what lights up our life, what creates a spark. When you've got that best friend that's totally behind you and that helps you, then that friendship really sparks you and helps you to move forward. Think about when you go to the bar and you're there with your partner in crime and she's like, I dare you to go up and go and talk to that guy. That's how a friendship can spark us. And that guy turns into our husband for the next 30 years, right? So that's how a friendship can spark us towards something like that. And so that's how to be seeing the sun in this particular context. Of course, noble personages, so nobility and the sun, royalty, nobility, high rank, honors consisting of pictures, statues, and garlands. So any kind of honors or awards are representative of the sun. High priesthoods, right? Because remember, the ninth house is God, and a high priest really belongs to and priests and bishops belong to the ninth. So high priesthoods belong to the sun as a preceptor, as a religious preceptor, and then obviously rulership over country or places. So as I was just implying, the sun is a hot and dry planet, which is of the choleric temperament. It's of what in Jyotish or in Sanskrit would be called Agni Tattva. And so Agni is fire and Tattva is element. And the sun is the principle of fire as light. So there are two planets that are Agni Tattva, that are fire element. And the first one is the sun, who's the principle of fire as light. And then the second is Mars, who's the principle of fire as heat. And so think they're both choleric planets, but think about the different way in which that can happen. So think about being blinded by the light, right? And then think also about touching something that's too hot and what that can do to your skin. So those are two ways in which we can be looking at how choleric temperament and also burnout, right? So burnout is a thing that we're a very common thing that we experience, especially in the professional environment, which is the 10th house, which we're going to talk about the 10th house of the sun in a little bit, but our public life, which is our work life, which is the 10th house, and which is usually represented by the sun as well. Okay, so light of the world and all-seeing eye, rules Leo, detriment in Aquarius, exalted in Aries, and fall in Libra. This is something that this was a footnote that Ben Dykes wrote in something I was looking at, and I thought this was it's just important to kind of see how central, we've talked so much about how central the moon is to our astrology, and the sun is too, but in a more indirect, maybe in a more kind of universal / global and indirect way. One of the things that's interesting about how the sun is looked at differently in Western astrology is from Vedic astrology, is that in Vedic astrology, the sun is the main kataka or significator for the soul, or it's one of the main katakas for the soul. Whereas we don't have anything like that necessarily in Western astrology. Instead, the sun becomes the main significator for religion and for one's idea of God, right? And then obviously, and also the 9th house. So, and also remember that the sun is the plant, or rather the lot, or the part, the Egyptian lot or the Arabic part connected to the sun is the part of spirit, which also is connected to faith and religion. So once again, it's how we go for the light. It's the light in the chart. It's the main light in the chart, and it's the main light from which all growth comes. It's the main light from which all things are generated. It's the main light, which is the source of life. Different from the moon, who is the mediatrix between the celestial and the earth, celestial realm and the earth, and who transmits the celestial down. That's not the sun's role. The sun's role is to be the source of all, in the same way that we look to God as that same thing, which is why the sun is connected to God. So recognized as the generating pulse of cosmic creativity. Here's maybe where this whole idea of Leo in the 5th house and creativity. And so, but maybe creativity isn't the best word. Generativity, I think, is a better word, which of course involves creativity, but generativity, I don't know, there's something about generativity that is maybe more potent than just creativity. So I would like to maybe use the term cosmic generativity. And so is described as the heart of the cosmos, right? Sun rules the heart, or the king who sits amidst his nobles. For Micah describes the sun as best and greatest, who holds the middle place in the heavens. So it's in the center of the heavens, mind and moderator of the universe, leader and princeps of all, who kindles forever the fire of the stars. There's this idea of a spark, of a divine spark, as sun as a divine spark. That's how we can be seeing the way that it's looking, not just the divine spark, but as the light of the world. I was just, I know Natalie follows me on Twitter. I was just talking to my Jyotish guy, and he asked what represents higher education. And so I started talking about the 9th house and higher, and how modern astrology looks at it as higher education. And he started making these different distinctions, like, wait, does the PhD and the master's and the this and that? And so one of the things I talked about, and I think this makes we can see this within the concept of the sun as well, because of course the 9th house is the joy of the sun, and the sun is God, and so is the 9th house, right? That's what the 9th house was called. So what I mentioned, what I said was that traditionally the 9th house is the house of knowledge, right? That's when we were looking at the 9th house in our traditional class. It's the house of knowledge, and it represented both teachers and students. That's what we got from Bonatti and from Alcabisi. Okay, so That's different from how we look at it today, where we look at it as higher education, that the kind of education that expands us further, right? But in this particular case, it was seen as all knowledge. And what I told him was that university education, that is connected specifically to religion. Matter of fact, all knowledge in medieval Europe was connected to religion, right? Because most people were not literate. Most people were illiterate, and almost all of the literate people in Europe were clergy. The main people who were literate in Europe were clergy during this Middle Age period that we're looking at. So up to the 13th century, which means that also then the church was that which dispensed most of the education as well. So it was actually the dispenser of education. It was the holder of the knowledge. It was the dispenser of the knowledge. And the very first university in Europe is the University of Bologna, which was established in 1066. Bologna at that time was one of the papal states. So at this particular time, Italy was not a unified country, and it was many kingdoms, the middle of which most of the states in that particular middle part of Europe, or middle part of Italy rather, were owned by the papacy. And so the very first university in Europe basically comes out of the papacy, comes out of a territory owned by the papacy. So once again, here we can see the ninth house, we can see education and knowledge, we can see religion, all here. And so, and how the sun is really involved in all of that. So now here we come and we start to see the sun as the light of intelligence, and the spark that leads us towards the intelligence, which in turn leads us to the light, right? Because if we're looking, someone have a question?
Excuse me.
Oh, no, okay. So in turn, it's that which leads us to the light, right? Because if we're looking at what are most people probably using to learn how to read and write? They're using the Bible. Or what are they learning? They're learning the Bible. They're learning scripture, right? So learning usually is involved in learning scripture, as well as whatever, everything that you're learning is to get towards being able to learn scripture. So that means that the light of intelligence is being used to learn, to pursue the light of God as well. So there we are with the sun, the ninth house, education, and religion. Okay, so here Abu Mashar says, sun is benevolent, hot and dry. So sun is benevolent except when he is conjuncting another planet, right? And opposing, except when he's conjuncting and opposing another planet. Hot and dry, choleric, we just talked about. Life-bringing, look at that. Gleaming, diurnal, a sensible person, wise, understanding, subjugating, right? A ruler can subjugate. A ruler, a mediator, rich, worthy, eloquent, thinking things out beforehand. There's the light of intelligence. Creating a balance, kind of a balanced mind, or a judicious mind, which we usually think of with Jupiter. So here we're seeing how, we were like, when we talk about the moon, we talk about how she takes on the qualities of any planet that she's with. And here it looks more like the sun has all of the qualities of all of the planets within him in potentiality, right? So if he's the real source of life, then he's the source of all different behaviors. And so as a result, then he becomes the source of pleasure and beauty, which belongs to Venus, judicious thinking, which belongs to Jupiter, high intelligence, which belongs to Mercury. You see what I'm saying? Valor and courage, which belongs to Mars. So a philosopher, giver of law, there's Jupiter. Religious, over middle brothers, a socializer, there's Mercury. A hastener of good and giver of evil. Supporting and pressing down. So supporting and pressing down. I like both of those. A hastener of good and giver of evil is the same as supporting and pressing down, right? Because a ruler can hasten, right? You can supplicate a ruler and say, oh sir, we need a new waterworks, we need a new aqueduct in our village, and the ruler can say, it's done. Or you can go and you can say, oh, we need an aqueduct, and he can say, I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. And by the way, I'm taking over all of the wells in your area as well for water supply, right? So a ruler can hasten good or give evil. A ruler can support your supplication or press down on you. And think also as far as weather. Anybody live near the desert or been to the desert? I lived in Texas for 5 years. I've never experienced such heat, such kind of what was the word I used? It was, oh God, there was a word I used for it, and I thought it was an Aries place because the sun was just so hot and oppressive. There, the word is oppressive. So notice that the sun, his sign is opposed by Saturn's sign. The sun and Saturn both can represent oppression. Crystal. I'm from Texas, very hot in the summer for sure. Exactly, like 101, 102, that kind of. I lived in Austin. But so, yeah, and so that the sun is really, really oppressive and hot. And so there's that pressing down. You can really feel the sun pressing down on you. But at the same time, if you've got the right kind of stuff that you're growing, the sun can hasten the good of growing those things. So same thing. Okay, Abu Mashar again. Nature of the sun is hot and dry, life-giving soul. Okay, life-giving. Once again, this idea of life, the giver of life, the source of life. Light and splendor, reason and intellect. The sun isn't acting benevolently. Would it automatically be said to be oppressive instead? Not necessarily, because, why not? I mean, let's think about it in the context of combustion. Let's think about it. Yeah, let's think, you know what, we're going to come to combustion in a second. So let me save this question. Let me save this question to when we come to combustion, and then we'll actually talk about this, because that's a perfect question for when we're about to look at combustion. And we're going to look at combustion and casimi. I've got 1 or 2 charts that are I don't have any combustion charts, but yes, I do. But I've definitely got some casimi charts, or a casimi.
You can use mine if you want.
Are you a combustion or casimi? You're both?
No, I'm combustion. My Venus is messed up.
Yeah, then we so then we can use your. Oh, but wait, isn't it combustion out of sign?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I mean, I still count it, but I would rather.
You can't have it both ways, Garth. They can't be bad and not like.
No. I think it's real. I think it's working, because basically, if the planet is within 15 degrees, you know what I'm saying? So, combustion is one of those things that I think if it's out of sign, it still works.
I agree.
Yeah, I think when it's out of sign, it still kind of shows up. Okay, so all of the things that we've talked about, and look at how what's the word I'm looking for? How much continuity there is between, Valens, who's from the 2nd century, and Abu Mashar here, who's from the 9th century. Okay, so that's 700 years, or what, 800 years, and already we're still, or 700 years, and we're still in pretty much the same area. Strength, victory, fame and beauty, with all these same things, greatness and loftiness of mind, all these same things, pride and good commendations, reason and intellect, knowledge. See, this is why the part of spirit is connected to the sun. So there's something about how the light, the life-giving aspect, and the light-giving aspect creates reason and intellect. And so this is something that, as I've been kind of working on the materials for today, this is what kind of keeps coming up for me. Multitude is also kingdom. Let's see, in the appetite for a kingdom and assets, right? Because kingdom is royalty and sun, and the greatness of esteem for gold. And he signifies a multitude of speaking and valuing of cleanliness. So there is the multitude of speaking, the Leo that can't shut up. And he impedes beyond measure one who is conjoined to him or approaches him. So once again, unlike the moon, who becomes who she's with, the sun, as source of all and the light that sparks everything, has in potentiality all behaviors that belong to the other planets in himself. which is why, so we're going to come to, now I'm understanding which is why combust is so bad. For he who was closer to him in place will be more full of labor than all men, and by how much more one will be elongated from him, he will be more fortunate. Exactly coming in more, and he impedes beyond measure one who is conjoined to him or approaches him. Because, now, and this is why, because since he already holds it in potential, he takes it from them when he goes in, when they go into combustion. So we're coming to your question now. He signifies a multitude of speaking and the valuing of cleanliness, and he impedes beyond measure one who is conjoined to him or approaches him. For he who was closer to him in place will be more full of labor than all men, and by how much more one will be elongated from him, he will be that much more fortunate. For he who was approaching the sun will leave no memory, nor will a trace of him appear. Right? The sun, because what happens? The sun occults that. He puts in order and destroys, profits and impedes, makes fortunate and unfortunate. Right? So this is what we were looking at before. Supporting and destroying. The other thing, pressing, what was it? Supporting and pressing down. Order and destroy. Profit and impede. Making fortunate and unfortunate. Raising people up. Putting people down. Represents religion. Judges and the wise. There's the ninth house in Jupiter as law. Fathers and middle brothers and the crowd and yellow bile. He is joined to men. Criticized, so he represents kind of judgment and criticism. He provides everything that someone asks for, is strong for revenge, punishing rebels and evildoers. All right, so and so this is Al-Khabizi, and we're going to come back to Al-Khabizi, but we're going to see it's all the same thing, aspect of fortune, bad assembly in one sign, right? Remember the term assembly comes from Al-Khabizi. Male diurnal, heat and dryness. Fathers, if the nativity were in the day, the greatest kingdom and life-giving soul, there it is, and light and splendor, intellect and beauty and faith, all the things that in which that light up our life, right? And in terms of age, the end of youth, but he partners with the rest of the planets in the arrangement of years. And mastery, supremacy, and position of first place, right? Because the king is first, and he signifies the hurling of, we're going to see this again, hurling of javelins and hunting and purging with every kind of, so he represents detox. Purging and detox, purity. And one of the things they talk about doing fire ceremonies in my Jyotish person, and he one of the things that he was saying was fire is the one element that cannot be contaminated. It is purifying. It purifies all, and it itself cannot be contaminated. So when we're looking at that concept that we were just talking about, where were we? Where was it? Hunting and purging. Oh, purging. When we're looking at purging and the kind of purging which bodies are purged inside and out, then we're talking about purification, and we're talking about the sun as as representative of Agni Tattva, as fire element, and as the main purifier. Right, because he's how the light of the fire purifies us. The heat, Mars is how the heat of the fire purifies us. The sun is how the light of the fire purifies us. Okay, so these are the stages of combustion. Once a planet is 15 degrees within the this is why I'm saying I do consider combustion to still work out of sign, because I think a planet is within 15 degrees wherever it is. So if that's the case, then definitely. A planet is considered in deep combustion within 8 degrees and 30 minutes. And then it's considered to be and combustion is considered to be the strongest impediment in traditional astrology. The planet being combusted is husked out. Now this has been my understanding prior, or this has kind of been what I've seen, is that the sun burns it out, it husks out and burns it, and then it takes on the significations. And I usually do it like this, where somebody says, oh, hey, where's Venus? And the sun goes, hey, you're looking at him, right? And so now I think what we just learned, or what I just inferred, gives us even more information, even more of an idea of how combustion works. Because if indeed the sun, unlike the moon, has all of the possible permutations of behavior of any planet in potentiality within it, then the minute that that planet comes into contact with it, that aspect of the sun comes up. It lights up. That aspect of the sun is like, oh, hey, I know how to do that. I'm where you come from. I'm where your love for beauty comes from. And so the closer it gets, the more, hey, come in, baby, come in. Yeah, that's right. We can do this together. Hey, just leave it to me. Just leave it to me. And of course, because the planet is blinded by the light and then also overcome by the heat, it can't really do anything, and it just lets it happen. It just lets it happen. It's like, okay, dude, you take it over. And so that's why when you say, hey, I'm looking for Venus in the chart, the sun goes, hey, I'm right here. It's me. I'm your Venus here. And you're like, no, you're the sun. You're like, hey, well, you know what? She can't come to the phone right now. There's that wonderful, horrible thing that Danny DeVito does in, I don't know, what is it, Ruthless People or whatever. And somebody has the wrong number, and he goes, what, Debbie? He goes, Debbie can't come to the phone right now. My dick is in her mouth. Sorry for those of you who are for that, but that's ultimately kind of what the sun is doing. Hey, Venus can't come to the sun right now, but how can I help you? That's really more like it. So I think, once again, so if the sun isn't acting benevolently, would it automatically be said to be oppressive instead? Yes, but oppressive in the way that the sun oppresses, which takes over. Right, the sun would take over. So we could see it as being, too judgmental or too discriminating. One of the things about gay male culture that I hated when I lived in San Francisco, it was very solar, very narcissistic, very kind of a solar narcissistic cult, and it was all about judging who was the, are you ready? Hottest. What guy was the hottest guy? Oh, he's hot. Oh, he's the hottest guy. Oh, yeah, he's really hot. Oh my God, like he's so hot. Like, who's the hottest was basically what it was all about. And everybody, and the constant judgment, the constant vision of, or I'm sure women, understand this or feel this, the male gaze, this idea of the male gaze. And remember that the sun and the moon are the eyes, right? So the vision, the sun represents vision. Right, so this whole idea of the male gaze, and so the male gaze run amok as gay male culture, because then it's all about receding hairline. Oh, I saw a little bit of roll of fat there. Oh, his pecs aren't really quite as big as I want. It's that kind of thing. Oh, he's kind of hot, but his cock isn't big enough, or all of those things. That's we think of Virgo as being discriminating and critical, but the sun also is, because it's nothing can exist in the light of day, right? What do they say? If you've got untoward criminology, what does it need? It needs the light of day. Put it in the sunlight, right? Isn't there even a sunshine ordinance or something like that? I think there's even a sunshine ordinance where basically things become exposed. So things can't be exposed. And so remember when we talked about the fourth house last month, and we were talking about secrets. And so now we can see how the fourth house, as being under the earth, subterranean, it's what we can't see. And of course, that's also the midnight point. That's where the sun is invisible. But the opposite of that is the 10th house, which is high noon. And that's where the sun is at its most visible. And so that's where reputation and public honor and kingdom and all of that other stuff, that all of that public and work and all of that stuff starts to happen. So same thing. So to answer your question, I do think that it's oppression, but it's not oppression in the same way that we think of as Saturn oppression, where I'm being held down, I can't move, I can't progress. Sun oppression is, hey, let me take this, let me take it over for you. It's almost like being gaslit. You're feeling sleepy. You're too weak to do it. You want me to do this for you, don't you? Right? It would be more that kind of thing, because the sun, of course, has the inherent ability to do anything. So now, and so let's talk about planets in combustion for a second. One of the first things I noticed when I started coming onto Reddit regularly, we used to get a lot, and thankfully it stopped. We don't get it quite as much, but we used to get lots of people who would write in saying, "Is it possible for me to be an actor? Is it possible for me to be famous? Is it possible for me to be a writer?" And almost every single person that wrote that stuff in had a combust Venus or Mercury. And so remember that the sun is arrogance and pride. And so the sun, and Jupiter is inflation, right? But the sun is overconfidence. And so there was this idea, and the sun is also not seeing things clearly, or seeing things from too bright a picture, or overestimation, right? So if Jupiter is inflation, then the sun is overestimation. And so what you tended to see was that there was nothing in the chart, in my opinion, when I was looking at these charts, there was nothing in the chart to support any of the things they asked about, except for the fact that there was this combustion which overestimated or had delusions of grandeur. And so I tend to often find that planets in combustion are subject to delusions of grandeur, of not seeing things clearly. That's one of the issues of combustion, is not seeing things clearly. So, because remember, combustion can hide you under the rays. If the planet that's under the rays cannot be seen. So something to just continue thinking about when we're looking at combustion versus casimi. Now, so for years and years, I didn't really believe casimi was a real thing. So planet within 16 minutes to the conjunction, to the exact conjunction of the sun, is considered casimi, and it confers extraordinary, purportedly extraordinary strength onto the planet involved. So I didn't really believe in it. I'd seen maybe one or two charts that had it, and I've got somebody in the astrology study group who has it, and she was really obsessed with it and was looking for how it was going to show up. But the thing is, if it's casimi, we shouldn't be having to look for how it's going to show up, right? It should be showing up. And I think maybe Diana Law might even have a casimi, or someone else in our group had a casimi, and it did show up kind of in an interesting way. But we're gonna look at a casimi chart. Now there was the first chart that I saw that was casimi that let me think that maybe there is something to this. It was Oprah Winfrey's casimi Venus. And then the second one that made me think about it was Ella Fitzgerald's casimi Venus. So we'll look at Ella, and I've got Oprah too, but we'll look at Ella and Oprah and see what we think about casimi. So now we're in Bonatti, heat and dryness, significator of father, nothing new. Okay, now remember, Bonatti is the main compiler of everybody else, right? He's the compiler, especially of all of the Arabs and Persians who came before him in the earlier Middle Ages. So very first thing he does is start with Al-Khabizi, who we were just looking at. And so he's naturally his fathers, which we've talked about. Sun is naturally a significator of father because the fourth house is the significator of the fathers, and the sun is the fourth planet from Saturn. So this is what he's basically talking about there, is the Chaldean order and how it's connected to the houses. So remember, it goes from Saturn to the moon. And the first house, Saturn would be the significator because Saturn is the form bringer, the form giver. And when we're born, we come into form. The second house would be Jupiter because Jupiter represents wealth and benefit. The third house would be Mars because Mars is the significator for brothers. The fourth house is the sun because the sun represents, and the fourth house represents the father. That's what he's doing, okay? And the sun is the fourth planet from Saturn, following after him, and even because he is the fourth planet who exercises his own operations in the conceived child. So they do the same thing with the Chaldean order, with the child in conception in the womb. And so it's like first Saturn does this, and then this, then, or it might be the opposite way. First the moon does this, then Venus, and blah, 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 right? So just something, and or something like it in giving spirit, right, namely by operating in it through natural heat, right? Sun is fire. Something like it in giving it spirit, right? The sun is the light of the spirit, and official members to the conceived child, and vital soul and the features of the face. So the vital soul is connected to the sun, even though it's not the karaka for the sun or significator for the soul that is. And the features of the face. We're going to see this quite a bit, that the sun representing the face. And he signifies light and splendor and beauty and intellect and faith. So this is now, we're in the 13th century. So from the 2nd to the 13th century, which is 1100 years, everything seems to be pretty consistent. He signifies a great kingdom and all other lay dignities, both the magnates and others. And this because he is posited in the middle of the others, there we are again, and the others stand next to him, certain ones on one side, etc. And he has power in all planets because he burns them all up. So we're starting here with the solar manner. So that's the sun and what it signifies generally. Now we talk about the solar person, what kind of person it creates. And Alcibiades said that he signifies all kinds of substance and of qualities of the mind, loftiness and subtleness, and that which pursues honesty and generosity and glory, and the prolixity of mind. So the sun is even loftier than Jupiter. Right? Remember, sun is God. So it's even loftier than Jupiter, right? All of this stuff that we're looking at, loftiness, subtleness, glory, generosity, honesty, those are all Jupiterian qualities. And prolixity of the mind, that's Mercury, right? But all of a sudden, we see that the sun is the kind of apotheosis of these qualities. Right? And theo is the word for God. Apotheo is above God, right? So when a person becomes the apotheosis, they become God, right? So this is the apotheosis of these qualities is represented within the sun. So that the sun is the representative of all noble qualities, right? Nobility, right? Remember, he represents noble personages. And of sex, he represents good worship and the like. And Alcibiades says that he signifies the command of the voice and the strength of speech. Now, when we talked about the 10th house as profession, we were looking at the 3 triplicity rulers, and the 3rd triplicity ruler of the 10th house is the command of voice. Or the second one was voice and its command, and the third one was like how well it would. We're going to look at that in a second. But that's one of the triplicity rulers of the 10th house. So at some point, what we're going to see is that there is a breaking of a tradition of specifically looking at all matters connected to kingship and royalty and God to the 9th house, and all of a sudden connecting the sun to not only the 9th, but to also the 10th house. Okay, so now we're in Lily. Now we're at the 17th century. Very faithful, keeping their promises with all punctuality, a kind of itching desire to rule and sway. There's the rulership. Prudent and of incomparable judgment. There is the judgment and prudency. Great majesty and stateliness. There's royalty. Industriousness to acquire honor and large patrimony. There's the honors and rank, yet as willingly departing therewith again. The solar man usually speaks with gravity, but not many words. So now that's different because we saw earlier that the person liked to talk. And those with great confidence, there's the confidence and command of his own affection. So there's this command of voice that we're talking about. Full of thought, secret, trusty, speaks deliberately, notwithstanding his great heart, right? So the sun rules the heart, yet he is affable, tractable. So intractable is something you can't move. Tractable is something that you can. And very humane to all people. So once again, Jupiter on steroids. The sun is Jupiter on steroids. The sun is the apotheosis of Jupiterian, Venusian. The sun is the apotheosis of all of the planetary traits together. I'm going to say it again, because actually this is the interesting thing that I've learned through the process of doing this, of working on this presentation. The sun is the apotheosis of all of the planets and their significations together. And very humane to all people, one loving, humane, there's Jupiter, one loving sumptuousness and magnificence. Okay, so Venus and Sun are our luxury planets, our planets who love luxury. And that's why often when you see the Sun in the second house, that person spends too much money. Remember, the Sun burns through. The Sun burns through the money. Mars in the second, the Mars burns through it through rashness and acting before thinking. The Sun burns through it through love of leisure and just spending through spending because of love of leisure. These are the things I've definitely noticed. Whatever is honorable, right? So honor and no sordid thoughts can enter his heart, right? Here's our solar body. And so once again, we kind of we're not dealing with the kind of coloring of the person or whatever. What we're really looking for is maybe ideas about hair, maybe ideas about height, maybe ideas about what type of body, fleshy or thin and tall or skinny. And so let's see, figures of men who would have a color between saffron and black, covered with redness, of short stature, okay, bald, and having a beautiful body, right? Remember, the Adonis is a solar figure. And Dorothea said the figure of the planets, figure of the sun and the moon is like the figure of the planets who are with them. So here's an interesting thing. He's basically saying, well, this is Dorothea, so we're back in like the 2nd or 3rd century. Dorotheus is saying that the sun is going to look like any planet that's with them because it's, it's a light, so that the lights basically take on the quality of planets. But I don't know how I would think about that, considering that I've just been saying that the sun actually holds the potentiality of all the planets within it. So, I mean, I could be wrong. Therefore, if you wish to know the figure of the sun, know that it is saffron, having a portion of red in the hair on the eyes, his eyes somewhat saffron. So that's what Bonatti is saying, that Mashallah and Dorotheus are saying. And Mashallah was an Egyptian Jew. Dorotheus is probably a Hellenized Egyptian. Ad-Dawla, sun makes a man full of flesh, okay, making a fleshy person, having a beautiful and white face. We won't deal with the white part. Eyes somewhat large, in whose face the color white is commingled with citrine. So once again, this kind of orangey yellowish thing that they're bringing in with the sun. Indeed, the solar man has a beautiful and full beard. This came up a lot, of beardedness for the sun. Wears long hair on the head. We just saw baldness, right? Mashallah said baldness. Now, Ad-Dawla is saying long hair. Now, of course, with Leo and the main, I tend to find Leo rising, ruler of the ascendant in Leo, sun in Leo, hair diva. But being bald can be being a hair diva too. So hair statement. It's not always hair diva, but always hair statement. And sometimes that hair statement is baldness. Okay, now, and so this is finally Lily and what he says. So good, large, and strong corporature, yellow, saffron. Once again, this kind of yellow and saffron, which are the colors they're connecting to the sun. Round, large forehead, goggle eyes, because remember the sun is vision, or large, sharp, and piercing. A body strong and well composed, not so beautiful as lovely, full of heat, right? The sun is warm. Their hair yellowish and therefore quickly bald. Much hair on their beard. Once again, more stuff with this beard. High, ruddy. Ruddy means red. Complexion, their body's fleshy. So once again, kind of this kind of fleshy corporature. Large and fleshy is what Lily is saying. In conditions, they are very bountiful, honest, sincere, well-minded, of great and large heart, high-minded, of healthful constitution, humane, sufficiently spirited, not loquacious. And so then he's talking about Oriental versus Occidental. And so now what we're realizing is that there isn't really a solar profession. What there is when the sun thinks about profession, the sun thinks about being numero uno, or prima donna, or the ruler, or the manager, or the owner, or the CEO. The sun isn't a worker. The sun is the ruler. The sun is the perfect example of the sun is the landed gentry in the antebellum South. They did nothing. Most of them had come directly from England. Many of them were from noble homes themselves. They did nothing. They owned slaves, and they basically made their money on slaves. But this kind of landed gentry who just owned all of these assets that worked for them. And think also about all of the Europeans that made colonies out of Africa. That's a sun thing. And also now think about oppression versus, as a matter of fact, in probably every single person in here has been affected by colonization. Every single person here. I have, right? Because my ancestors were brought to the United States as slaves by the British. Leila Kabiri has, she's of Iranian descent, and definitely Persia and England and all of in the Middle East and Iran and all of the Middle East and stuff has gone on. This stuff has gone on. Certainly, anybody, Natalie Vernon is of African descent, and it could be, you're living in Ireland, I know, but I know you were born in the United States, but I think, but also you're from Jamaica, right? You're Caribbean, so that means that you've got Caribbean ancestors that were brought by the British. Yeah, right. So colonialism is solarism. So, and this is how the sun can quicken your fortune or oppress you, right? And so think of how certain people have done well under colonization and certain people have been pushed down, right? So the colonizer is the ruler over your area, is the new, what do they say? Meet the new boss, same as the old one, right? So that's the sun. So when we look at the sun by profession, fathers of the native, it signifies the greatest kingdom, terms of age, and of mastery, supremacy, and the position of first place. Okay. Oh, okay. Maria Henkel says also colonial ancestry, native islander and African. All right. And of mastery, supremacy, and position of first place. The sun is not a worker, and he signifies the hurling of javelins and hunting and purging with every kind of purging. Remember, we looked at this when we were talking about purging, as far as the sun and purification as the light of purification. But now what we can see is that the sun, there are no solar professions. Instead, what we look to the sun for is for rank. And so I thought what we would do is go back over how Bonatti looked for rank in a chart, and to see if we think some of these things are important. And also how Valens uses this thing called the predominator, this predominating technique, using the lights. And I thought we would maybe look at those two things. Okay, so Lily says, of professions, kings, princes, emperors, dukes, marquises, earls, barons. So all of those people are royalty, or nobility or royalty, right? They don't work, or maybe they work if they want to, right? Lieutenants, deputy lieutenants of counties, not lieutenants in the army, but lieutenants and deputy lieutenants of counties, people who rule counties. Magistrates, gentlemen in general. So anybody who upholds this kind of high culture. So when we think of high culture, anybody here who speaks Deutsch, Hochdeutsch, right? When we think of high culture, like the opera, the ballet, the symphony, Hochdeutsch, high literature, poetry, all of that stuff, even though that all is art, a lot of that stuff is art, which belongs to Venus, it still also is high culture, which belongs to the sun, right? What do we call, remember what I called noon? High noon. Noon is what? The 10th house is noon. And the 10th house is external profession and reputation. Courtiers, right? Gentlemen in general, courtiers, desirers of honor and preferment. Justices of peace, majors, high sheriffs, so anybody in charge, high constables, great huntsmen, right? So a great huntsman is in charge of the area in which he's hunting, right? He knows the area in which he's hunting extremely well. And remember that one of the main pastimes of the British nobility and of nobility in general is hunting. If anybody's ever seen that movie, The Queen, which is about when Princess Diana was killed and how it was dealt with in the royal family, it opens with the Queen on a hunt, right? And of course, there's all those things that we've seen of nobility in their red and white, their red jacket and the white thing, and those weird pants and the stirrups and everything. And that's all the nobility. That's sun. That's solar. So hunting and the sun. I never really put two and two together until now. Okay, principal magistrate of any city, town, castle, or country village. Steward of a nobleman's house, yea, though a petty constable, where no better or greater officer is. Goldsmiths, right? Because the sun rules gold. Pewters, coppersmiths, minters of money. Brazier, oh, brazier, isn't a brazier, it's something that you hold something in. Well, I guess which is what a brazier is anyway, isn't it? Not
No,
a
you're
glove.
totally right. It's the thing they hold stuff in, but it's also the person who burns stuff. So they're working with fire.
Ah, there we are. Very good, thank you. Tell me, oh, that's right, you're Islamic, but doesn't Ahura Mazda come from? Doesn't the Zoroastrianism and Ahura Mazda, doesn't that come from Iran as well?
Yeah, it does. And I would say if I were to identify with a religion, it would be that one, not Islam.
Okay, all right. So, and that's all about fire worship.
Yeah, fire and sort of duality.
And so to me, it was interesting to me, which, well, and duality, and the sun can do what? The sun can lift you up and push you down.
Yes.
Right. And so it's interesting to me that you were the one that knew exactly what that was about, and the one that burned something. And sure enough, in Zoroastrianism, there would probably be some kind of brazier that you would use to burn something, or there would be a brazier who burns.
I mean, to be fair, I knew the noun. I didn't know what well, I guess they're both nouns. I knew what the like object was. I wasn't sure what the profession would be, so I just Googled it.
Interesting. I wonder where the word comes from. It'd be interesting to see. It sounds like a Middle Eastern word, though, doesn't it?
Kind of, yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so body parts. So now look at, so once again, Benatti is being compiler. So he's going all the way back to Vettius Valens, and he goes to Omar, who's like 7th century, 8th century, and signifies the image of a man's countenance, and particularly the right eye of a man and left eye of a woman. There's a chart. I wish I could find it. I don't know if I saved it, but a woman wrote in with her sister's chart on Reddit, and the sister was having major problems, especially with her vision. And sure enough, I said, oh, you know what, this is, the sun, the sun was all over it. And I said, you know what, and I said, the sun is the left eye for a woman, and there's probably issues, and it could also be particularly the left eye. And she was like, it is her left eye. So all of this is still right on. If I can find that chart, maybe I'll put that up again or whatever. But I'm not sure I saved it, but I remember writing about it and being like, oh shit. Okay, and Ben and Abu Ali said that it signifies of members the heart, okay, the marrow and the thighs, and of infirmities those which appear in the mouth. Right, the sun represents the mouth, like cancers and others which eat the flesh of the mouth. So canker sores, things of that nature, herpes, canker sores, any kind of problems with the mouth, bad breath, halitosis, gum disease, and every detriment of the mouth, and the coming down of water in the eye. Of course, eyes is water, eyes is sun, and his virtue and authority is especially in the head, right, because there's the connection with the sun in the face. And the Hindus said, now I thought this is interesting, and the Hindus said, wherefore when he is in the ascendant, he will be burning up. And he whose significator he was will have a sign on his face. Now I've got, by Vedic astrology, I have the sun in the ascendant. I have the sun in the first house, but I have it in the same sign as the ascendant in my Vedic chart. And the thing that my Vedic guide says is that when you've got the sun in the first, that your mind, because the first house is the mind, your mind is always going because the fire is burning, because the sun's fire is always igniting it. And I would definitely say that. I don't know so much about this.
I have that too.
You have that too, but I do know I have kind of a shiny, that my face can be quite shiny. So maybe instead
I just
of
know
burning,
I talk loudly.
that's the Mars. Mars makes the loud noises. Mars is the disturbance. Right, so that's the difference between sun is heat, sun is light, and Mars is heat. Right, so the Mars is so that you might talk a lot, or that you might what's the word? You might hold court is the sun, but that you might talk so loud that everybody is annoyed is Mars. Let's see. So Al-Kabizi says, oh, so it's pretty much the same thing, right? Because wasn't he just saying what Al-Kabizi said anyway? Eating of the flesh in the mouth, marrow, heart, and thighs, corruption of the mouth in particular, descending in water in the eyes, his power in the head. And oh, so that's where he got it from, was from Alcabisi. And so here we come to Lily. Pimples in the face, right? Because pimples are inflammations, right? They're pustules. Pimples also belong to Mars, right? Because of the redness. Palpitation or trembling, or any diseases of the brain or heart. There was connection with the sun and brain and with the spine, although we don't really see it here, even though this is Lily, so it would have been here. And then we're going to see Saunders in a second, and Saunders is really the even better, he's an even better source for medical astrology. So brain or diseases of the brain or heart, tympanies. Tympany is rhythm, so that's basically any kind of arrhythmia. Infirmity of the eyes, cramps, sudden swoonings, diseases of the mouth and stinking breaths, catarrhs, running fever, rotten fever. So catarrhs are kind of fevers like wet, kind of flus and things of that nature. Principally in man, he governs the heart, the brain, the right eye, the vital spirit, and in women, the left eye. So the brain, didn't we see that Mercury also had the brain as well before? And almost all of his infirmities were in the head and were mental infirmities, were brain type infirmities. So it's interesting that the sun is involved in the brain as well here. But the right eye, left eye for a woman, and the vital spirit, we saw that too. So the vitality of the sun, right eye, heart, brain. Once again, sight, right side. One of the infirmities that I remember seeing was this thing called what is it called? Pleurisy, and pleurum means side. It means when you've got like this pain in your sides. Sinews, head, nerves, with the ring, what is that? The ring, with the ring finger of the hand. Interesting. So sinews and head and brain, sight, heart, eyes, right eye specifically, but the sight. And so yellow collar, right? Because the sun is yellow. Burning fever, right? So the fevers, obviously anything that where you're heated up, the tertian fevers, the semi-tertian and tertian fevers, beating and palpitations of the heart, swooning, ophthalmia, redness of the eyes, right? That makes sense. Bloodshot, hot rooms, any kind of problem with the eyes, acute diseases such as proceed from choler, right? Because hot and dry, so like unto Mars, but more remiss. Consumptions, colic, pricking under the sides, remember that's the pleurisy. Bastard pleurisy, there we go. Pimples on the face, trembling of the vitals, or any disease of the brain or heart, tympanies, infirmities of the eyes, cramps, sudden swoonings, diseases of the mouth and stinking breaths, rotten fever. So pretty much everything we've got here. Principally in man, he governeth the brain, the heart, the right eye, the vital spirit. In women, the left eye, the pulse uneven, swift, and intended. And we're about to finish, and then we'll start going to charts. Colors. Now, I thought this was interesting because this is how the tradition has changed. So Alcabisi is 9th century, Lily is 16th. So in 700 years, we go from the color being whatever is transparent to being yellow, gold, scarlet, or clear red. And some say purple. Some say purple because purple is a royal color. The purple and gold are the royal colors. In savors, he likes well a mixture of sour and sweet together, not the sharp, or the aromatical flavor, being a little bitter and styptical, but withal confortative and a little sharp. So interesting how he's built on the sharp, and this idea of the transparent is no longer there. Now, obviously, remember we were just talking about the sunshine clause and how the sunshine clause creates what? Transparency. All right. Planets. The principal virtue is to strengthen the heart and comfort the vitals, right? So it's the vital energy and the heart that we're looking to work with medicinally when we're working with the sun. So to resist poison, or to clear the eyesight, right? Because the sun is also the eyes. Or to dissolve any witchery or malignant planetary influences, because black magic is what's done in secret, and the sun can bring transparency to it. And so he rules saffron. So for those of you who are thinking about maybe doing a sun altar, now, Anne Louise is in here. But those of you who've got combust planets, you might think about doing solar magic, planetary magic, to help you with the planet who is combusted. So saffron, ginger, amber, musk, marigold, rosemary, cinnamon. So we know that ginger and cinnamon are heating, right? Cinquefoils, barley, peony, but cinnamon, ginger. What's the other one that I was looking at? But cinnamon and ginger we know are heating. But it's interesting. The saffron is the color of the sun. You know, so all of those, it's very interesting. And we can see the ash tree, the laurel tree, the myrrh, frankincense. So if you're using a sun altar, if you're doing a sun altar, you can use frankincense for your scent. You can use cedar with sage, or you can put oranges or lemons there, right? And then the lion, the horse, the ram. So we know the lion, of course, but the bull, the crocodile, the goat, nightworms or glowworms. Glowworms, I think that's interesting. So maybe even one of those lightning bugs could also maybe be the sun, right? And so this is just more pictures of marigold, laurel, rosemary. So rosemary, so when you're cooking with rosemary, you could be doing some kind of little solar incantation. You know, if you do like a rosemary and basil, what is it called? Oh, a pesto, right? You do a rosemary and basil pesto, you're doing, we can figure out which one basil is and which one rosemary is, and that's all of a sudden become a planetary concoction of sorts. And then garlic itself is something, right? So garlic might even be the Mars, sun might be, right? So garlic, the oil, the olive oil, the garlic, the basil, and the rosemary together, all of those are ruled more than likely by some planet. And you would be creating some kind of concoction, some kind of planetary concoction. Here's our miscellany. So fishes, the sea calf and sea fox, the eagle for the sun, the cock, the phoenix, of course, the nightingale or peacock for the sun. And peacock is the national bird for India. Let's see, places, houses, courts of princes, palaces, theaters, all magnificent structures, obviously. Clear and decent halls, dining rooms. Minerals, the sun has domination of fire and clear shining flames. Over metals he rules gold. And here's hyacinth chrysolite and etite stone. I wonder what that is. Oh, such a stone be the ruby. You know, ruby is the gemstone that they use in Vedic astrology for the sun. So ruby is also a good one for sun. I thought I would come to, the countries: Italy, Sicily, Bohemia, the fourth climate, Phoenicia, Chaldea. Chaldea is Babylon. Chaldea is basically, with somebody was called Chaldean, they were actually being called an astrologer. And Michael is the archangel Michael is the sun, is the solar angel, and he of course rules Sunday. I just wanted to check any other different places: Samarkand, Khorasan, and Persia, and Italy. So, and the land of the Romans. And that was, I think, oh yeah, indeed that was. Yeah, so that is our main section. If anybody has any questions now, you can go ahead and ask. And now I thought I would go to a few charts of different people. Oh, but before I did that, actually, I thought what I would do is look at, I would look at two different things. Okay, so this is from Valens, and basically he's starting this entire thing by saying an examination of distinguishing characteristics of the previously mentioned triangles, and he's talking about the trigons or the triplicities, and triplicity means element. Okay, so he's basically saying you can figure out what's going on with the person by looking at the triplicity that the sun is in, and where and what's going on with it by day. So along with the lofty or mediocre fortune of each person's nativity will be indicative. For day nativities, so those of you who have a day chart, who here has a day chart? How many people are here right now? Just you and me? Oh, you mean Maria? Oh, Maria. So do you two have day charts or night charts?
I have a night chart. This is Maria.
Maria, thank you. And night, okay, so night chart. So we would do that. So we would do this exact same thing for you with the moon. But what you see here, this is essentially the technique called the predominator. It's a Hellenistic technique. And it's interesting to me that I never really kind of figured it out when I was looking at Valence. But it's been kind of, so what you would do is you would look at the light in charge, right? And so for the two of you, it would be the moon. But since we're talking about the sun, we would take this. And then you look to see, first of all, what element it's in. Then you look to see who the house ruler is, right? So who rules the sign it's in. And this helper is who the term ruler is. So what I want you to do, so even though both of you have nighttime charts, we're going to do this for the two of you with your moon to figure this out. And we'll do it for the two of you with your moon because it's the exact same thing. And then we're going to do it with another chart, because what he basically is saying you would do, and let's use Elvis Perez. No, he's a nighttime chart. Let's use, nope, another nighttime chart. One of the things I've been noticing is that lots of people who are, here's a daytime chart I know of. Okay, lots of people who are famous are born at night. It's one of the things I've noticed quite a bit. Okay, so this is Ella Fitzgerald's chart. What you're going to do is, while I do this one, you're going to write into the chat your answers for your moon, and then we'll look at it. So what we're doing is we're looking for the element that the sun is in, or that the light in charge is in. We're looking at the 3 planets who rule that element by triplicity. So we'll get to that in a second. Then we're also looking for its house ruler, and we're looking at its term ruler. And then we look to see if it's in an angle or a succedent or a cadent house, and then what's aspecting. Okay, and so this gives us an idea of how things are working. So going to Ella Fitzgerald, so we see it is a daytime chart, so we would look at her sun, and the sun is in the Earth triplicity in Taurus. The 3 planets that rule the triplicity are Venus, Moon, and Mars. Now, what we would also then look to see the planet who rules that particular sign, which is Venus, who is here with the sun. And then we would look also to see the planet, see what is the term ruler of 5 degrees of Taurus, where the sun is. And the term ruler is also Venus. This is a good chart to use because this chart involves a lot of different things. First of all, this chart has a casimi planet. Venus is at 4 degrees and 44 minutes of Taurus. The sun is at 4 degrees and 55 minutes. That's 11 minutes of difference, which makes the Venus extremely close. But what this also does then is it says that the sun is not just in the same sign as the ruler, it's in the same sign as the ruler's helper. Remember, the ruler of Taurus is Venus. The term ruler of Taurus is also Venus. And the sun is in both the term and the essential dignity, the domicile of Venus. Notice also that even though Venus is not quite within 5 degrees of the cusp, I'd still put this sun Venus in the 10th, because we know that Bonatti would have given 8 degrees for angles, 5 degrees of leeway for the succedents, and 3 degrees of leeway for the cadence. So I would go ahead and put the Venus and the sun in the 10th house, basically remember, one of the things that we wanted to look at is the sun angular or succedent or cadent? And sure enough, this sun is very much, if we look at it this way, is very much angular. So in this particular case, not only is the sun in the 10th house, the sun is also with the planet that rules the sign he is in, and with the term ruler who rules the sign that he's in. And not just that, the sun is with the other benefic, right? So the sun is with both of the main benefics, Venus and Jupiter. Now, of course, the sun rather, is combusting the Jupiter, but the Venus is casimi. So you all have heard me go on and on about Ella Fitzgerald and how important she is, and how actually not just important, but how probably Ella is the greatest non-classical singer of the 20th century. And not just that, how Ella has a huge illustrious career, all kinds of amazing honors. Remember, we talked about how I watched this Kennedy Center's honors thing, and at the same time as she was being honored, the people that she was being honored with are Aaron Copland, who is America's main classical composer, Tennessee Williams, who is America's main playwright. So people of that stature were Henry Fonda, who was one of the most important male film actors. So that she was in that same kind of illustrious, there's a solar word, she's in this same illustrious company. This person is has an illustrious career, an illustrious reputation. I was talking about how I was listening to a concert of hers, and she's introduced at the very beginning as simply the best. Presidential Medal of Freedom. Just all of the highest honors that can be bestowed to anybody in entertainment. The most Grammys. I think she's won like 17 Grammys or 18 Grammys or something like that. So all of the stuff that's 10th house, honors, awards, reputation, fame, high fortune, all of that stuff, there we have it with this sun. Right, and so when we look at the planets that rule by triplicity, so for Earth it would be Venus by day, Moon by night, and Mars participating. Then we use timing. So Venus becomes the first 28 years of life, Moon becomes the second 28 years of life, and Mars becomes the last 28 years of life. And Ella Fitzgerald became famous. She had her first million-selling hit when she was 21 years old or 20 years old. She made her first recording when she was 16. So that first era of life, from birth to 28, is Ella's rising fame. And then this next era is when Ella becomes First Lady of Song, right? So here it is in the 11th. The moon is in the 11th, which we know is also the good spirit. And notice how the ruler of the 11th is in the 10th. Right, and then the third triplicity is when Ella is not resting on her laurels, still overworking herself and starting to have illnesses, starting to she's starting to have diabetes, and she ends up with both of her legs getting cut off. And notice how Mars, the ruler of the third triplicity, is squared by the ruler of the sixth. Right, so that latter part of life is where all of the health issues came to roost. So that's using the Benevolence technique for looking at predomination and what the life is going to be based on predomination. Now, here's another thing which we worked on, which we looked at when we first looked at when we did the traditional astrology course, and we looked at profession. And so the first part of Benati's nativities on profession, or his chapter on profession, is how you find profession. But then the second part of that is what profession really, how high you get. And actually, I want to show something else first, because I wanted to show how connected, how everything that is 10th house is really connected to the sun. So this is in the first part of the 10th, of his thing on the 10th house here, on the 10th. And so he basically does his compiling thing. So Alblas says 10th house is a royal house. Royal is the sun. Empire and kingdom. Professions and dignities and offices. Sun. Every art which someone practices once he is called a master. Remember, we saw the word mastery and master, that's son, but and magisterium is a term that they use for profession, son. Here, this is not son, mothers and grandmothers, right? But here, da'ula, divine things, son, honors, son, position of civil authority, son. Al-Kendi, the king, son, glory, son, reputation of one's worth, son. Al-Batani said that it signifies judges judging a case. Now, that's not really what we think of with sun, but we saw some concepts of justice and judiciousness with the sun here, and overseers of works, which is definitely sun. And here we are. First Lord of the triplicity is of the royal house signifies power and exaltation and the loftiness of the seat of power and the highest dwelling. All of that is sun. And the second one signifies the voice of command. Remember, we were talking about that, and I said, I know it's one of those. It's either the second or the third. Al-Kabizi talks about the commanding voice for the sun. So the voice of command and the boldness of the same. And then the third one signifies its stability and durability. So so we can even, what is it? So first one is the loftiness of the seat. The second one is the voice of command. And the third one is its sustainability, or how well it sustains, right? So we've got an earth sign on the 10th cusp. First triplicity ruler is this casimi Venus, right? So that's the loftiness of the seat. Indeed, it got lofty. Then the second triplicity ruler is the voice of command. Notice that it's in a sign of attractive voice, which is the human signs are signs of attractive voice, right? It's the moon and the sign of attractive voice. Ella Fitzgerald is also known for her youthfulness. And then its durability and stability. And even though there may have been difficulties, this Mars square Saturn, at the same time, it was highly durable, right? Remember, we talked about when planets are in their own signs, they're at their most durable. So going back then to this other, looking at rank. If you wish to explore concerning the native's force and prosperity and his duties and his kingdoms, look at the sun and diurnal nativities, and the moon and Saturn in nocturnal nativities. The 10th and its lord, the part of the kingdom, and the planet in whose domicile you were to find the part, right? So, but the main thing he did was what he said. He says, when I'm looking at this, at the luminaries, oh wait, you were to see significators, sun and the moon, in the angles, namely made fortunate and strong, joined to the benefics and with reception, and the oriental ones were aspecting the sun, and the occidental ones were aspecting the moon and Saturn. This will signify the native is undoubtedly going to be a king. So I don't know about that. I've been using the part of fortune as an indicator for rank for such a long time, and we talked a little bit about that last week, that I don't really think it always kind of works, right? But what does he say? We're looking for the sun in the diurnal nativity. We're looking for the moon in a nocturnal nativity. We're looking for the 10th in its lord. We're looking for the part of kingdom, which we're not going to look at the moment. But what we're really looking at here, which if it were not, as I said, concerning the luminaries, right? So the very first thing he's saying is, if you see these things, if you see either the sun or the moon, the sun by day or the moon by night, in angles, fortunate and strong, joined to benefics, with reception, and the oriental ones were aspecting the sun. So now let's go back to Ella. Because Ella's is the day chart. And sure enough, so we know that the sun is in the 10th. We know that it's with both benefics, including the ruler of the ascendant. So note that not the ruler of the ascendant, the sun is the ruler of the ascendant, but it's also with the ruler of the 10th house and the ruler of its sign, which means that Venus is pushing power. Remember when we talked about reception and we talked about pushing nature and pushing power? That's a form of reception. So Venus is pushing power at the sun. So Venus is receiving the sun from her domicile. So this ticks almost every single box. The only box it doesn't tick is that is that Jupiter isn't over here in Pisces sextiling the sun, but it's got almost every single, in Pisces, which means that the Jupiter would be oriental. Although what he prefers is if the internal planets are oriental. So there are no oriental planets except for Venus and Mars, and they're not able to aspect the sun. But in this particular case, almost every single other thing that it talks about is happening. Now, I was looking at all kinds of people. Let's look at somebody like Queen Victoria. But see, once again, so many of these people don't have, oh, this one does. Okay, perfect. So the answer, the question once again was, so kingship. Is there a situation in which the sun is in an angle, fortunate and strong, joined to benefics, with reception, and the oriental ones are aspecting the sun, and the occidental ones were aspecting the moon and Saturn, okay? So it's daytime because the sun's above the horizon. The sun is within 5 degrees of the ascendant, so it's in the first house. So the sun is in the ascendant. The sun is very much where we would say, so this person could very much kind of be a king. And also what we tend to see is when the sun's in the first house, it often means that they have a significantly important father, like a prominent father. And of course, her father was king. Let's see what else that we would be looking for. Is there some kind of connection to benefics? Now, of course, the moon is a natural benefic, and she's the ruler of what house? The second house. So she's the ruler of the second house. Now, one of the things, that I think about is when we think about hereditary royalty, I think about family, right? Because it's hereditary, right? It's not, you don't earn that position. You basically inherit the position. So I would be looking at the 4th house and the 8th house, right? The 8th is what you inherit from the dead. And the 4th house is what you inherit, is your patrimony, right? And so is there any connection between the 4th and the 8th, and the 4th or the 8th and the ruler of the ascendant, or the 10th and the 9th, any of those kinds of things, or even the 3rd, right? Because the 3rd, remember, was called queen, right? The sun was called king and the 3rd was called queen. The sun was called God and the 3rd was called goddess. And look who rules the 3rd house. The 3rd house is ruled by the sun, who's in the ascendant with the moon, who's the queen. So the king and the queen are together in the 1st house on the part of fortune as well. And also notice that the planet that rules the part of fortune and the ascendant also rules the 4th house. So there's our patrimony. Now, if you remember when we talked about the 8th, we also connected to the 3 different things, that the 3 different triplicities. So the first triplicity of the 8th was death. The second triplicity of the 8th was old things, ancient things. And the 3rd was that which was inherited from the dead. So it's Earth, so Mars would be the 3rd triplicity ruler, that which is inherited from the dead. And look at how it's with this Venus. It's very well, it's in the 11th, and it's very well aspected by this Venus, and with Rahu, which can create a total of, kind of unexpected rises. So even though there's not necessarily a connection between the ruler of the 8th and the ruler of the 1st, or the ruler of the 4th, or the ruler of the sun in this particular case, or the moon, what we do have is we've got the triplicity ruler that represents what we get from the dead, with the major benefic in the 11th. Remember, the 11th is good spirit, and that's future. It's the future realization of hopes and wishes. So on some level, the 11th and the 9th and the 10th, they all need to be kind of strong. They all need to be in good shape. And notice how the Jupiter is aspecting the part of fortune, aspecting the first house, although not quickly, but also how the Mars is just leaving the sextile to the Jupiter as well. So the Mars is just leaving it. It's not even a full minute. It's not even a full, rather, degree away. Right, so it's just coming out of influence, and that connects the ruler of the 10th and the 11th. And of course, Spirit is the same planet, right? So Spirit and Fortune, because Sun and Moon are it's you know a what do we call it? It's a new moon. Fortune and Spirit are the same planet, and notice how it's in the 12th house. So I think that's kind of interesting. I wonder if there was a sense of isolation, or I'm wondering about that. Because if I'm not mistaken, Victoria never left the castle very rarely, if I'm not mistaken. She was a very good singer. She studied with one of the important operatic voice teachers, and was quite a good singer. And so let's see, and see, Gemini is an attractive voice. It's a sign of attractive voice. The moon's the ruler of the second on the ascendant, on the sign of attractive voice as well. Okay, so here's a royal chart. We've got the sun there. And a daytime chart. So here's the thing. One of the things I was looking was Elvis's chart. He's the king, but Elvis's chart is a nighttime chart. So he couldn't really work for me. So what we're seeing is that in these daytime charts, so here's another chart. This is a chart of the King of Thailand. The King of Thailand was one of the richest monarchs in the world. This is the king before the present king, his son. He was the King of Thailand while I was living there. And also so this is the King of Thailand. He's one of the longest ruling monarchs as well. He was ruling, he died just a few, maybe 2017, 2018, and he had been ruling since he was 18 or 17 or something like that, young, really quite young, maybe 21 or something, but not young. Now, here's the thing about this King of Thailand. His brother was supposed to rule, and his brother died mysteriously. And so one of the things that I find interesting about this chart is, first of all, see that the ruler of the third is in the third. And then also notice that there's this, remember also that Mars is the significator for brothers. So there was something about this that brought that up to me. Oh, I know what it was. It was the fact that it was the possibility that this person might be the brother's secret enemy. That was what I was thinking about. And so the brother, the first house of the brother, right, is this Pisces, which means that the 12th from the brother, which would be the brother's secret enemies, would be this house, which is ruled by Saturn, which is also the ruler of the ascendant. Note how Saturn, the ruler of the ascendant, and the ruler of the second, which is the 12th house from the brother, is in the 11th house, at the end of the 11th house, but really in the 12th house. The Sun and the Saturn are both in the 12th. Remember also that the Saturn is in joy in the 12th house, which could mean that there could very well have been machinations. One of the things about the king, one of the interesting things about this king is that he was kind of worshipped as a demigod in Thailand. And as a rain god. He had more patents for cloud creation. Thailand is tropical and really, really arable. It's 85% agricultural. It's extremely poor, but the King of Thailand owns most of the land, almost all of the land in the country. But at the same time, he was this particular person, and what I think is so interesting about this Saturn-Sun conjunction is that this particular king always was seen in a very humble way, even though he was deified. So when you would go to movies, the very first thing you would see would be this 1.5, 2-minute anthem, Thai anthem thing about the king, and it always started with cracked earth. And if you know anything, Saturn is the earth, right? So Saturn is the dry earth, the cracked earth, and of course, Sun is hot and dry. And then you started to hear rain, you started to see clouds, and you started to hear rain. But you never saw, you only saw the king in his regalia at the very end. You saw him throughout in regular day clothes, talking to regular people. You never ever saw him in his full kind of kingly regalia until the very end of the film. And so he was always, or rather, he always came off, and two, he was always projected in this extremely humble manner. So that and as the father of the country, that's the other thing, as the father of the country. And look at how both of these fathers are here. The sun and Saturn are together. Now, technically, sun in the 11th, but not. It's really in the 12th, which says that, in my opinion, maybe some machinations of some kind happen. Look at how also the Mercury and Mars are together. You know, I call that banditry. I mean, Thailand is Thailand is a developing country where most of the population is poor, and most of the population doesn't know how rich the monarchy really is. So I remember when I was talking to a relatively well-educated Thai who about what I had learned about the land holdings and about everything else, well, first of all, they were in complete denial about it. There was no, now this says rating B, but it said A from Lois Rodden when I checked it out. So this could be not correct, but I just thought I would use it because having lived in Thailand, having lived in a monarchy, having dealt with the reverence for this king. This guy was loved, and look at how the Venus is way up in the what would be the 10th house. It'd be interesting. Let's see if we can find this chart by whole sign and see how it would change. Oh, it's going to take too long. Sorry. Anyway, but what we would see is that the Sun, Saturn, and K2 are all in the 12th, and the Mercury and Mars are in the 11th. And so Mercury, Mars, like I always say, is criminality and highwaymen, and Thailand is one of those places that is a military, that's really a military dictatorship disguised as a democratic republic. And so there's military soldiers and military that would be an 11th house that would help. And as a matter of fact, that's what they think happened, was that he agreed to keeping a kind of a military dictatorship, and that was why they decided to push him forward as king. So I find this very interesting because I remember when I first moved there, hearing about how, first of all, observing the extent to which this king was loved. And then secondly, and notice also the part of fortune is in Taurus and ruled by this Venus that's up at the top of the chart. And then also hearing about the brother who was supposed to have been king and how he died mysteriously. How they notice that this king of Thailand was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right? So they were raised overseas, went to Harvard, and all that kind of thing. So I just thought that is kind of an interesting thing. We can look at a few other charts, unless you have if you have questions, or actually what I'd love to do is open it a little bit. Wait, let's look at this fucker. Because look, he's got it too. So it's in the 11th, right? Which is almost as good as the sun's in the 11th, which is almost as good as the first. Notice also the sun is the ruler of the ascendant, that the ascendant is on Regulus, which is sudden rise, that the sun is sextiling, applying to the sextile of the ruler of the 9th house, which is also close to the Regulus, that the sun is separating from the trine to Jupiter, right? So this is a very, very well situated sun for Donald Trump. Right, so this is someone who didn't deserve what he got, but he got it. He got it. And note also, Aquarius is on the Aquarius is the part of fortune. The 10th house from the part of fortune is Scorpio. There's the ruler right on the ascendant and on the Regulus. Right, so that's how when we looked at our stuff from last time, that's how we can kind of see some of these things. So questions? Oh, not just questions, actually. So let's talk about because all of you are, I won't say new to astrology, but are newish within the last 5-10 years, maybe. What I'd like to ask you is, what was your understanding of the sun? What has been your understanding of the sun up to now, up to kind of getting into traditional astrology, etc.? So, like, Natalie, when you think of kind of like modern astrology and the sun, or when you were getting into astrology, what did you think of?
It would have been very, very individual and very inwardly focused in terms of describing the person and their outward motivations to the world. So there was no kind of talk about its relation to other planets and how they might interact and things like that. It was very much from a psychological point of view, I suppose, if you're only looking at it from modern astrology, which would have been my kind of introduction to Western astrology. Whereas today, I think, especially like as I explore things like combustion and stuff like that more and more, because I have Sun and Mercury in the first, just understanding how it interacts with other planets and how that can completely and totally change the operation of your chart is something that I'm becoming more aware of. And this has clarified a lot of points of that as well for me.
Great. What about you, Maria?
Yeah, so I think similarly to Natalie, it was also a psychological perspective, but more so like the sun was symbolic of the ego, I guess, like an ego motivation of the individual, and less so, I don't know, like a solitary thing, but like it was always like, oh, what's the sun and ascendant and the moon, and that was kind of like that was your persona, and the other aspects of the planets or the houses was not something that I really noticed or cared about until like probably the last year or two, when I started attending your courses, and I realized that there's really a lot more to this than just what has been peddled around modern astrology, I guess, and it's been very interesting to me. I also have some close planets to the sun, but for me the biggest is I have the opposition to the moon, and the moon being in Gemini. It just like it means so much more to me knowing that it's in opposition than just knowing that, oh, my sun's in Sagittarius and my moon's in Gemini. Like I had no idea how big of a issue that would be, and the sun being opposite, and then the moon also being in the 9th house, and how that's we're normally like Sagittarius, or I don't know, it just all of those things kind of have been very eye-opening and interesting.
I have a question for you. Your moon's
Yes.
in the 9th house. Have you ever been accused of heresy or being a witch or anything of that nature?
Yes, you asked me this before. Do you remember?
It was you.
It was me.
You. Oh.
That was me. Yes, I was.
That was you. Okay, because it was because of that. It was because of that question that I was asking. Oh, so it was you that was, because isn't it?
I never realized until you told me that would even be an issue in my life through astrology, right?
but the funniest thing was that, remember how I kind of stumbled on it? I was just kind of freeballing, and all of a sudden it just kind of came out, and you're like, well, that actually did happen. I'm like, oh my God.
I know. So once we had that conversation, I started like thinking about it even more, like, wow, this moon is like way more dominant in my chart than the sun. I always thought, oh, I'm Sagittarius because I have, Mercury Sagittarius, Sun Sagittarius, and like Mars is like 1 degree in Capricorn, whatever. So I just identified it as more of that. But then with the moon being so prominent as a full moon, like I never really cared about it until you mentioned that. And now that I look at it and what aspects the moon, it's like, oh, okay. And I was born at night, so it makes sense,
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording,